Hello, and welcome to our discussion on perhaps the most grandiose of all 19th century masterworks. I'm Tristan Andrew, here to present the first two operas of Richard Wagner's epic four-part Norse-based music drama, The Ring of the Nibelung, and its connection to Halloween. Let's begin, shall we? When the average American is asked to name some Halloween music, they are most likely to mention Boris Pickett's Monster Mash or Michael Jackson's Thriller, which are notably part of popular culture. When we say art music, we are talking about what many refer to as classical music. Art music is not generally considered pop culture, although there have been some crossovers between the art music world and popular culture. Popular music songwriters have borrowed art music melodies such as Paul Simon's use of a Lutheran passion hymn harmonized by Bach for his American tune. And art music composers have always felt free to incorporate folk melodies and tempos into their music. Take, for instance, Dvorak's New World Symphony. A quick review of art music yields no music composed specifically for Halloween. So does that mean there is no Halloween art music? Definitely not. After all, Halloween is far more than monsters and magic. We also think of death, destiny, and a whole range of supernatural topics as part of Halloween. This would include all the creatures and characters that appear in mythology and cultural myths themselves. Take, for instance, Anatoly Lyadov's triptych featuring Baba Yaga and Kikimora, Edvard Grieg's Peer Gynt with his In the Hall of the Mountain King, Sibelius's Tapiola, Paul Dukas' The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Hector Berlioz' Symphonie Fantastique, Franz Liszt's Totentanz, Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor, etc., etc. When we break down Halloween into its related concepts, we find an enormous body of art music that we can associate with this most deliciously scary holiday, which leads us into our discussion of Richard Wagner's works. Richard Wagner is the controversial godfather of modern music and composer of The Flying Dutchman, Lohengrin with its famed bridal chorus, Tannhäuser, The Meistersingers of Nuremberg, Tristan und Isolde with its now notorious Tristan chord, and Liebestod. The Ring, which is the subject of our discussion, and Parsifal. Wagner has been credited with many innovations that would influence music of the period. He dismantled harmony through the use of augmented and diminished chords to invoke pain and anguish. He shifted operatic form from variety show, mastered in France and Italy, with ballet, to a continuous musical story, one seamless whole. Something he called Gesamtkunstwerk, total work of art. More importantly, opera under Wagner became less about entertainment and more about instruction and the redemption of society. He masterminded new theatrical effects such as dimming the house lights, hiding the orchestra, and over-the-top settings including on-stage fires and ghostly effects. He perfected the use of the leitmotif, calling card, of musical segment, referring to characters, places, objects, and even concepts. Actually pioneered decades earlier by Hector Berlioz's Idée fixe, but brought to preeminence by Wagner. He also expanded the use of chromaticism, the musical equivalent of filling a canvas with a multitude of colors instead of just a few. This results in taking away the satisfying effect of harmonic progression that had been defined in the ages of invention and elegance, the Baroque and Classical eras. The result was a deliberate attempt to make the music more exotic, unstable, and unfamiliar. It works to evoke discomfort in the listeners. But Wagner's place in history is marred by his rabid anti-Semitic stance, taking it so far, both musically and in his writings, as to suggest the need to kill Jewish people in order to finally remove their influence from German culture. Of course, he did not originate these views, and they may have actually helped to increase his popularity. Needless to say, this opinion would find horrific fruit in Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. That said, Wagner ranks among Halloween's musical giants. We have Ludwig II of Bavaria to thank for Wagner's late works. He was intensely interested in Wagner's operas, inspired at the impressionable age of 15 by Lohengrin, followed by Tannhäuser 10 months later. Wagner's operas appealed to Ludwig's fantasy-filled imagination. Wagner had a notorious reputation as a political radical and philanderer, and was constantly on the run from creditors. In May 1864, the 51-year-old Wagner was given an unprecedented audience with Ludwig in the royal palace in Munich. It is safe to say that without Ludwig, Wagner's later operas are unlikely to have been composed. A year after meeting with Ludwig, Wagner presented his latest work, Tristan und Isolde, in Munich to great acclaim. However, the composer's perceived extravagant and scandalous behavior in the capital was unsettling for the conservative people of Bavaria, and Ludwig was forced to ask Wagner to leave the city 6 months later. Ludwig provided a residence for Wagner in Switzerland. Wagner completed The Mastersingers of Nuremberg there. It was premiered in Munich in 1868. When Wagner returned to his Ring cycle, Ludwig demanded special previews of the first two works, Das Rheingold and Die Walküre, at Munich in 1869 and 1870. Wagner, however, was now planning his great personal opera house at Bayreuth. Ludwig ultimately loaned him 100,000 thalers to complete the opera house, as well as paid for the Wahnfried villa for Wagner and his family to reside in. In 1876, Ludwig attended the dress rehearsal and third public performance of the complete Ring cycle at the Festspielhaus at Bayreuth. Wagner never truly abandoned his political leanings. Likewise, he believed much of his early lack of success was due to too much influence in German society by foreigners, French and Italian composers, but more specifically, Jewish composers and Jewish financiers. In his 1850 polemic, Judaism in Musik, frequently employed traditional anti-Semitic abuse to argue that Jews had no connection to the German spirit and were thus capable of producing only shallow and artificial music. According to him, they composed music to achieve popularity and thereby financial success, as opposed to creating genuine works of art. The Ring of the Nibelung is a cycle of 4 German-language epic music dramas. The works are based loosely on characters from Germanic heroic legend, notably the Old Norse poetic Eddas and Volsungasaga, and the Middle High German Nibelungenlied. Wagner had become a proponent of exclusionist German nationalism, and freely edited these mythology sources to write the librettos for his Ring cycle, in the interest of elevating and edifying his audiences as to the need to purify German culture. The composer termed his 4-part mythology cycle a Bühnenfestspiel, stage festival play, structured in 3 days, preceded by a Vorabend, preliminary evening. It is often referred to as the Ring cycle, Wagner's Ring, or simply the Ring. The Ring would, according to Wagner, contain the beginning of the world and its end. As we have already noted, a critical component of Halloween is its association with the supernatural, and thus with myth. We can see that the inherently supernatural elements of mythology give works like The Ring a place in the Halloween repertoire. Wagner wrote the libretto, or the text, and music over the course of about 26 years, from 1848 to 1874. The 4 parts that constitute the Ring are in sequence: Das Rheingold, the Rheingold, Die Walküre, the Valkyrie, Siegfried, and Götterdämmerung, Twilight of the Gods, Ragnarok. Individual works are often performed separately. They contain dialogues that mention events in the previous operas, so that a viewer could watch one without having watched any other and still understand the plot. However, Wagner intended them to be performed in series. The first performance as a cycle opened the first Bayreuth Festival in 1876 over a 4-day period in August. Opera stage director Anthony Freud stated that The Ring marks the high water mark of our art form, the most massive challenge any opera company can undertake. For its complete performance, Wagner decreed that the house lights should be dimmed. This was such a novelty at the time. It drew gasps from the audience. He also hid the orchestra under the stage and instigated theatrical effects never before attempted. It is directions like these that point to Wagner as the father of modern theater. Before we discuss the story or the music that helped to create it, we have to acknowledge some of the underlying themes and ideas that drove Wagner's vision. While he relied on actual stories from Germanic and Norse mythology, he freely adapted them to illustrate his own creative vision. For example, Das Rheingold, the Rheingold, with its extraordinary power, was the potential power of German culture and Wagner's belief in its superiority. This power is cursed by the Nibelungen dwarves that, for Wagner, represented Jewish culture and its corrupting influence. Wotan, or Odin, and the gods, the giants that at first aid him, and the relationships controlled by treaties represent the German leaders who surrendered their power to Jewish influence and are thus corrupted and ultimately cursed to be destroyed by it. Modern productions attempt to remove the anti-Semitism inherent in Wagner's vision, interpreting the evil as greed and lust for power that lives in all of us. Wagner himself saw the corruption as only vulnerable to the redeeming power of love, willing to sacrifice for the sake of others. In his mind, the others would be a new Germanic culture that would reign supreme because it would be purified of foreign elements. Modern productions do not define the beneficiaries of this sacrifice. Wagner introduced various elements into the ring that have been controversial since the first performance. For example, in Die Walküre, Wagner makes Wotan, the father of the boy and girl twins Siegmund and Signy from the saga The Volsungs, calling them Siegmund and Sieglinde. In the saga, Signy was forced into a marriage with a king who plans the destruction of her father. Through magic, she has incestuous as well as adulterous sex with her brother and gives birth to a son who helps his father in various adventures, only to die in his father's stead. Wagner turns the offspring of incest, or adultery, into Siegfried, or Sigurd, who ultimately reforges his father's sword and kills the dragon Fafnir. The justification of love that rejects social norms in order to create a hero probably reflects some attempt to assuage Wagner's guilt over his own many irregular relationships. Given his willingness to adapt the saga in other ways, it is hard to otherwise explain retaining this problematic relationship. The ring starts with Das Rheingold, the Rheingold. It gives the background to the events that drive the main dramas of the cycle. It recounts Albrecht's theft of the Rheingold after his renunciation of love, his fashioning of the all-powerful ring from the gold, and his enslavement of the Nibelungs. This is followed by Wotan's seizure of the gold and the ring to pay his debt to the giants Fasolt and Fafnir, who have built his fortress in Asgard, Valhalla. Albrecht curses the ring and its possessors. Erda warns Wotan to forsake the ring, and we see the early manifestation of the curse's power after Wotan yields the ring to the giants. Fafnir kills Fasolt. The opera ends with a famous procession of the uneasy gods into their fortress, Valhalla, across the Rainbow Bridge, Bifrost. There is an ominous shadow of impending doom in this finale. Die Walküre, the second part of Wagner's Ring, introduces us to the Volsung twins, Siegmund and Sieglinde, who were born of a union of Wotan and a human woman during his wandering of the earth after the events of Das Rheingold. It is Wotan's belief that such children would not be bound by the gods' treaties. Other post-Rheingold events include the deliberate transformation of the giant Fafnir into a dragon, who guards the gold and the ring in the depths of the forest. Wotan has fathered 9 daughters with the goddess Elra, who become the Valkyries, whose task is to recover heroes fallen in battle and bring them to Valhalla in preparation for Ragnarok. Separated in childhood, Sieglinde and Siegmund meet and fall in love. This incestuous and adulterous union angers the gods, who demand that Siegmund must die, but Sieglinde and the couple's unborn child are saved by the defiant actions of the titular character, Valkyrie Brunhilde, who, as a result, faces the gods' retribution. This retribution is terrible indeed. She is to be stripped of her Valkyrie status and become a mortal woman, to be held in defenseless sleep on the mountain, prey to any man who finds her. But Wotan consents to her request that he surround her resting place with a circle of fire that will protect her from all but the bravest of heroes. We include the 2 most famous pieces from this opera to demonstrate its enduring popularity. Die Walküre features the famous Ride of the Valkyries. It is this piece that people tend to think of when the word opera is mentioned. One of Wagner's best-known pieces, The Ride of the Valkyries, is often heard in a purely instrumental version, including the iconic helicopter attack scene in the Vietnam War movie Apocalypse Now. In the opera, the ride begins in the prelude to the 3rd act, building up successive layers of accompaniment until the curtain rises to reveal a mountain peak where 4 of the 8 Valkyrie sisters of Brunhilde have gathered in preparation for transporting fallen heroes to Valhalla. As they are joined by the other 4, the familiar tune is carried by the orchestra, while above it, the Valkyries greet each other and sing their battle cry, Hoyotoho. As female characters from Norse mythology, the Valkyries are unquestionably supernatural. Wagner's music is a harsh and unforgettable evocation of their power over the world of men. This concern over the power of the supernatural on the human world is the underlying premise of every Halloween-related concept. At the end of the third and final act of Wagner's Die Walküre, Wotan bids farewell to Brunhilde, sending her into an enchanted sleep. Loga, the Norse god of fire, creates a protective circle of fire around the rock where she lies. Only the bravest of heroes will be able to penetrate the fire, foreshadowing Siegfried's appearance in the next opera. At the opera's 1870 premiere in Munich, the special effect of the flames terrified the audience. From the beginning of this excerpt, magic is in the air in the form of bright, shimmering colors and the dizzying, descending chromatic sequence of the music. Siegfried's leitmotif. Becomes a soaringly heroic proclamation in the low brass. In the moments before the final curtain falls, at least two other prominent leitmotifs appear, which occur throughout the ring cycle. The ominous fate motif. Followed by the nature or Genesis motif. This final motif, evoking the gently rising and falling water of the mythical Rhine River, emerges in the gradually unfolding prelude of Das Rheingold, the first opera of the Ring cycle. We have seen how the first two operas in the Ring tie together an epic story even though they can stand alone. You can watch one opera and feel like you have received some important ideas in a bigger story. Kind of like reading one book in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy. Just as some characters and concepts appear in both operas, so too do their accompanying leitmotifs. Wagner continues this throughout the Ring cycle. It is interesting to note that some characters do not continue throughout the cycle. Fasolt dies in Das Rheingold, and the twins Siegmund and Sieglinde don't appear after Die Walküre, although their offspring, Siegfried, is a critical character in the final two operas. Our next presentation will take up where we leave off here, with Wagner's vision of the importance of love, sacrifice, and redemption. See you next time when we cover Siegfried, the third opera in the cycle. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and keep listening. Thanks for watching.